Hello everybody. I thought today what I'd like to do is read you a story. It's incredibly strange reading a story sitting in my lounge, but I'm going to share with you a book called The Mousehole Cat. Now, I first came across this book a very long time ago when I was teaching up in Huddersfield, and it was one of the first books that I taught my first class. Never did I know that Mousehole existed or that I would be lucky enough to visit it. So I'm going to share this with you. It's about a cat. And as you know, I like my cats. So, at the far end of England, a land of rocks and moorlands stretches itself out into a blue-green sea. Between its high headlands lie tiny sheltering harbours where the fishing boats hide, especially in the winter storms. One of these harbours is so small and the entrance between its great stone breakwaters is so narrow that the fishermen call it the Mousehole. You actually pronounce it Mousehole. The people who lived in the cottages around the harbour grew fond of the name and they call their village Mousehole to this day. It tells you in the book. They say it in the Cornish way, Mousehole, but you may say it as you choose. And once there lived in the village a cat whose name was Mouser. There's Mouser. She had an old cottage with a window overlooking the harbour, an old rocking chair with patchwork cushions, and an old fisherman named Tom. And if you ever go to Mousehole, the house is there, you can see it. Mouser had had many kittens in her time, but they had all grown up and left home. Her eldest son kept the inn on the quayside, and it was noisy and smoky. And his man had once spilled beer on Mouser's head as he was drawing a pint. So Mouser didn't go there very often. One of her daughters kept the shop on the corner. It was busy and crowded, and her lady had once stepped on Mouser's tail as she was weighing out some vegetables. So Mouser didn't go there either. Sometimes Mouser felt that her children had not trained their people properly. There we go. Okay. Now, there's Mouser with Tom sitting by a nice warm fire. Her own pet was Tom, and he was well behaved. He never spilled the cream when he was filling her saucer. He always stoked the range so that it had a beautiful golden glow, and he rocked the rocking chair just the right speed. He knew the exact spot to tickle behind her ear where Mouser liked to be tickled. And what was more, he never wasted his time drawing off pints of beer or weighing out the vegetables. When he was not looking after Mouser, he passed the day in a most useful way. He took his little boat out through the narrow opening in the breakwaters, out into the blue-green sea, and caught fish for Mouser's dinner. Mouser was very partial to a plate of fresh fish. In fact, she never ate anything else, but she did like a little bit of variety. So on Mondays, they made morgy broth, Mouser's favourite fish stew. On Tuesdays, they baked hake and topped it with golden mashed potato. On Wednesday, they cooked kedgeree with a delicious smoked ling, another type of fish. On Thursdays, they grilled fair maids, a mouth-watering meal. And on Fridays, they fried launces with some butter and a squeeze of lemon. On Saturdays, they soused scad with vinegar and onions. That means just to sprinkle it on the top. And on Sundays, they made stargazy pie with prime pilchards in pastry. All in all, Mouser passed her days very pleasantly. And here, we've got a picture of them cooking. Looks very nice, doesn't it? One year there came a really terrible storm. At the far end of England, the blue-green sea, turned grey and black. The great storm cat is stirring, thought Mouser, as she watched at her window. The wind whined like a wild thing about the high headlands. It came hunting the fishing boats in their hidden harbours, and when the great storm cat is howling, thought Mouser, best to stay indoors by the fire. The sea drew itself up into giant waves and flung itself against the great breakwaters. All along the coast of Cornwall, the stone rocks stood still. Then the sea sucked up its great strength again and roared right over the top of them, sinking the sailing boats in their home havens. But it couldn't get into Mousehole. Mouser watched as the great storm cat clawed with its giant cat paws through a gap in the harbour wall, but it was too small. It snarled and leapt up over the great breakwater under the lowering sky, but it was too high. The fishing boats sat as safe as mice in their mouse hole, and they could not get out. And there, look, we can see, looking like cat's paws and the sailing boats all lined up, safe from the great storm. Because the fishermen could not get out, there was no food. They ate up their few vegetables that were left in their gardens. They ate up the salted pilchards that were left in their cellars. Mouser hated vegetables, and the pilchards were far too salty for her. Soon there was nothing left. The cats and their people grew very hungry, and Mouser sat by her window, staring out at the storm, and thought longingly of morgy broth and stargazy pie. Every day the fishermen gathered on the quayside, and sometimes they would try to take a boat through the Mousehole, but always the great storm cat lay in wait for them, and they were lucky to escape with their lives. And there we can see Mouser sat by the window looking longingly out to the harbour, and you can see the storm cat just through the gap. Sad times. Then at last one evening, as old Tom sat with Mouser on his knee, she felt him take a great big sigh. "Mouser, my handsome," he said, for he was a courteous and well-spoken man. "Mouser, my handsome, it's going to soon be Christmas, and no man can stand by at Christmas and see the children starve. Someone must go fishing, come what may, and I think it must be me. Can't be the young men. They've got wives and children and mothers to weep for them. But my wife and parents are long gone, and my children are grown up and gone too." Mouser purred, to tell him that she understood. "I shall go out tomorrow, Mouser, and I shall not come back without a catch." Mouser purred louder than ever, to tell him she would go with him. For he was only a man, she thought, and men were like great mice in the paws of the great storm cat. There. Besides, she knew that if he did not come back, she didn't want to go and live in somebody else's cottage, or have somebody come and live in her cottage, not without Tom. There would be no one to pour the cream, or stoke the range, or rock the rocking chair, or at least do it in the way that Tom did. Nobody in the world would know just where she liked to be tickled, behind her ears. "Tonight, Mouser, my handsome, we shall eat the last of the morgy broth, baked hake, ling, launces, and we will gather all these things and bring them back in so people can have fair maids and sow scad and stargazy pie." Mouser purred, as if she was going to burst. The next morning they set out very early before the others were waking, and before they went, Tom stoked up the old range and damped it down so that it would burn steadily throughout the day until they returned. He hung a lamp in the window so it would shine out across the harbour and light their way. And as they reached the quayside, Mouser looked back through the wind and the rain and thought how warm and welcoming their window looked. There, we can see the light in the window. Soon their little boat was crossing the harbour towards the Mousehole Gap, and the voice of the great storm cat rose all around them like a great caterwauling. As she listened to his wailing, Mouser felt a sudden sadness for him. How lonely he must be, she thought, hunting the men mice in the deeps of darkness and never returning to the rosy glow of a red-hot range. Her kind heart was moved to comfort him. Many a tomcat had Mouser tamed in her time with the sweetness of her singing, and now she lifted her head and sang, joining her call with the cry of the great storm cat. And there, we've got a little picture of Mouser on the front of the boat and the storm cat coming through the gap. And so it was that he was taken off guard as the little boat made its bid for freedom. Soothed by the sweetness of Mouser's serenade, the great storm cat paused in his prowling and pulled back his giant paw, just for a moment, and swiftly the little boat passed through the mousehole and out into the open sea. And then the great storm cat played with them as a cat plays with a mouse. He would let them loose for a little while as they fought their way towards the fishing grounds, and then down would come his great cat's paw in a flurry of foam and water. But he did not yet strike to sink them, for that would have spoiled his sport. When they reached the fishing grounds, the sea was so rough it was very hard to put the nets over the side. "I fancy you must sing again, Mouser, my handsome," said Tom, "for your voice seems to soothe the sea like the sirens of old." So Mouser sang again, longer and louder than she had ever sung before. Indeed, old Tom was forced to block up his ears so that her siren song would not distract him from the business of fishing. Again, the great storm cat paused in his play and sang with her until the nets were safely over the side. Oh, this is a nice picture. Okay. Goes right across onto 2 pages. There's the great storm cat. Fabulous picture. Fabulous. All day they fished in a seething sea. The waves were so high and the clouds so low, they soon lost sight of the shore. And all the time the great storm cat played with the little boat, striking it and then losing it, but never quite sinking it. And when his claws grew too sharp, Mouser would sing to him to soften the edge of his anger. As evening came down, they hauled in the nets. Into the belly of the boat tumbled ling and launcy, scad, hake, fair maids, enough fish for a whole cauldron of morgy broth, and enough pilchards for 100 stargazy pies. "Mouser, my handsome, we're all saved," said old Tom, "if we can bring this haul home to harbour." But Mouser knew that the great storm cat would strike when he saw them running for the shelter of the mousehole. She knew that the game only serves to sharpen his appetite for the feast that is to follow. "It's his meal or mine," thought Mouser, as she looked at the fish in the belly of the little boat, blue, green, silver, glistening in their greyness, and it made her mouth water looking at them. As she thought of the morgy broth murmuring on the top of the range, the stargazy pie growing golden in the oven, Mouser began to purr, and her purring rose like a hymn to home above the noise of the great storm cat's howling. Such music had not reached the ears of the great storm cat since the dawn of time. For when do cats purr out in the wind and the darkness? Puzzled, he paused in his howling and bending his ear to catch the strange sound. It seemed to him that he had once heard such a song long before, when he was no more than a storm kitten. The great storm cat grew quiet. Gone was his hunger for hunting, for making his meal of the mice men. Only the pleasure of the purring remained. And then the great storm cat began to purr with Mouser, and as the sound grew, the winds waned and the waves weakened. Look at that. Isn't that a lovely picture? You can see why I like this book. Night fell and the little boat sailed back across a slackening sea. As they came in sight of home, a strange sight met their eyes. The whole village of Mousehole was shining with lights and lanterns gleaming along both arms of the harbour. And when the people of Mousehole had woken to find old Tom's boat missing and a light left in his window, they knew that he had gone out to fish for them. Either fish or perish in the deep water. All day they watched and waited, staring out into the cloud-racked sky, but they could see no sign of him. And when night fell, the women went home and set candles in all the windows, and every man lit a lantern and went down to the harbour wall. Look at that. As they waited and watched, they saw that the wind was dying down and that the sea was growing calm, and the dark clouds lifted and a thin moon shone out between them. And in the light of the thin moon, they saw a small boat coming home, and behind it, the smallest, tamest storm kitten of a wind. As old Tom and Mouser came through the Mousehole Gap, a sudden breeze caught them, a tiny, playful cat's paw, like a gesture of farewell. There. You see that nice picture? You see the cat? There he is, just with his paw behind the little boat as it's coming into that tiny, tiny harbour. There was a great deal of cooking in Mousehole that night. The people made a whole cauldron of morgy broth. They baked hake, cooked kedgeree, grilled fair maids, fried launces, soused scad. They baked 100 stargazy pies, and then the people and cats, they feasted together until the hunger was no more. And every year since that day, the people of Mousehole hold a fish fest on the night before Christmas Eve and raise their glasses to the memory of old Tom. And in every year, in the yard at the back of the inn, the cats of Mousehole gather and raise a great howling to the memory of old Mouser. And every year, folk from all over Cornwall at Christmas come to see Mousehole lit up with 1,000 lights, shining their hope and message for a safe haven to all those who pass in peril on the sea. Now, I don't know how true this story is, but I do know that at Christmas time, Mousehole really is lit up with thousands and thousands of lights. So, I hope you like the story, and we'll see what we can find to read you next week. Until then, stay safe, work hard, do what you can, and hopefully it won't be too long before we see you.